So good evening, everyone. Tonight's talk is going to be the third on what becoming means in relation to the dependent origination. And tonight's talk will be on a sutta called the Mula Sutta, which is only tangentially connected to that, but it's important in the context of the previous two talks. But first, we'll meditate. Find your relaxed meditative posture. And gently close your eyes and gently close your mouths. And holding your back straight but not stiff. Your ears aligned with your shoulders and nose aligned with your navel. But holding yourself very loosely, very gently, very lovingly. Allow yourselves to settle into this room. Settle onto your seats. Settle into your bodies. And settle into your minds. And take a moment to become aware of the sensation of breathing in your body. Just get a feel for what that's like. To be mindful of your breath in your body. And while remaining mindful of your breath in your body, notice that thoughts are flowing. We're conscious beings, thoughts should be flowing. The purpose of meditation is to not be distracted by your own thoughts. So when you find that you're caught up in your thinking again, simply acknowledge that and return your mindfulness to the sensation of breathing. Relaxing your thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. And we'll meditate for 20 minutes with callbacks every 5 minutes. relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. If a persistent thought or feeling arises, stay with it for a moment or two. Recognize it as impermanent and return your mindfulness to the sensation of breathing. And we'll meditate for 5 more minutes. Take a moment to notice the quality of your mind. Be at peace with your mind. And when you're ready, you can gently open your eyes. So tonight's talk is the third of three of a series of talks on the meaning of becoming. Becoming is probably the single most misunderstood and misapplied teaching in all of the Buddha's Dhamma, because it's almost always presented in the teachings without a modifier. In other words, there's nothing after becoming to define what becoming means, unless you are mindful of the context in which the Buddha is teaching, and then it becomes very clear what becoming means in this context. So if you have an idea of what you would like Buddhism to be rather than what the Buddha taught, you'll modify it based on that conditioned thinking, which is what often happens. I'm going to review the dependent origination just briefly. The other two talks I get into it a little bit more detail, but I won't tonight, as long as I can resist doing so, which isn't easy for me. So dependent origination is what the Buddha awakened to. And it's another one of those misapplied and misunderstood teachings that, to me, I think is, now it's very simple and direct. But it took me a while to develop an understanding of the simple and direct teaching. When my mind was conditioned towards wanting to believe other things, or thinking that the Buddha taught anything other than suffering and how to bring that to cessation, even reading this simple and direct sutta, I came to different conclusions. So I understand the confusion that's all around. And it's a difficult thing to understand when it's only engaged in inconsistently. In other words, it's something that we should be mindful of as we're developing the rest of the Dhamma. On retreat, we're able to develop, in fact, really is the point of the retreat, so I can develop a broader picture of the Dhamma within the context of dependent origination and the other teachings that are supportive of this. But as I'm reading this, just be mindful of the directness of this teachings, and that it leads directly to Four Noble Truths. From ignorance, and so it's always written this way, from ignorance as a requisite condition, but that could even use a modifier after ignorance, and that would be from ignorance of Four Noble Truths. As a requisite condition come fabrications, and so I am going to get into a little bit about this. So fabrications, the best description, the simplest description is assumptions, and so we make assumptions about ourselves in relation to the world that we live in, and those assumptions are based on ignorance of Four Noble Truths. So the cat's out of the bag, everything follows from that. From those fabrications, as a requisite condition comes consciousness, and that consciousness that we're talking about, again, is not a grand cosmic consciousness that we're all hoping to aspire to and that we're all a part of. It's simply consciousness that is driven from these false assumptions that are rooted in ignorance. So it's an ongoing ignorant train of thought. From consciousness as a requisite condition comes name and form, and that's, again, a simple explanation is just self-referential views, is name and form. From name and form as a requisite condition comes the sixth sense base, our physical senses, and that ongoing consciousness that's rooted in ignorance, in this context. From the sixth sense base as a requisite condition comes contact. So again, this could be confusing right at this point, because certainly we're human beings and we have contact with the world outside of dependent origination. But again, keep it in the context. We're talking about dependent origination. We're talking about the problems of ignorance of Four Noble Truths. In that context, and in consciousness rooted in false assumptions that are themselves rooted in ignorance, now we're interpreting what we're coming in contact with through that ignorant view, through a wrong view. I understand that. From that contact, as a requisite condition, comes feeling. And feeling in this sense is not just physical feeling or not just mental or emotional upset. In this context, it's any disturbance in the mind that has arisen out of ignorance through that causative chain. Is that clear? From feeling as a requisite condition comes craving. Something happens to me, rooted in that ignorance. I like it, I want more of it. Or I don't like it, and I've created now an aversion to it. And it's generally an aversion to life, even though it's specific to one thing. I've discovered that there's things that I like and there's things that I don't like. I've discovered now that there's things that I need to maintain my happiness and my security, and there's things that I need to avoid. And these are all self-referential views. The Buddha sometimes referred to that as joining to, in the general way, joining to suffering, clinging to suffering. Now I've created an identity over needs and dislikes. From feeling as a requisite condition comes craving. From craving as a requisite condition comes clinging and maintaining. And I've just kind of described that. Once I want and what I dislike, I am now going to cling to that self-referential view. No matter how difficult that clinging may make my life, because now I've created an identity. This is who I am. A good example of that, something that I've had a long personal experience with, is with addiction. The essence of addiction certainly is clinging, isn't it? And despite the incredible difficulties that it brought into my life, because I had created a strong identity for it, and I created an underlying ongoing craving for drugs and alcohol and anything else that changed my mood, I couldn't get out of it. I couldn't extract myself out of it. And in the Gara Sutta that a few of us talked about earlier, the Buddha talks about getting stuck in this feedback loop between self-referential views and this ongoing consciousness rooted in ignorance. And that's really, and I'm not trying to simplify or minimize addiction, it's awful, but this relates to all compulsive thinking, and it really relates to all types of clinging and attachment. Once we get caught in that feedback loop, all the evidence that says we should get out of this, we can't. And why? Because we're stuck in it. And I know it sounds like a simple answer, but we continue being stuck in it because we're ignorant of these Four Noble Truths. Our minds are conditioned or compulsed to continue to go in a certain direction. And unless something interrupts that thinking, now in modern, just because I reference it, in modern addiction, we know that something has to interrupt that addictive behavior if the addict has any chance of gaining recovery. And some of those interruptions work, some of them don't. But that's not really the point. The point that I'm trying to make is that we need something to interrupt conditioned thinking, compulsive thinking, addictive thinking, habitual thinking. The Buddha recognized that too. That's called conditioned thinking. And that's the sole reason why he presented an Eightfold Path, to interrupt that feedback loop of conditioned habitual thinking. I'll just state that again. From craving as a requisite condition comes clinging and maintaining. From clinging and maintaining as a requisite condition comes becoming. There's the heart of the matter, becoming. So, and again, it's not presented with any modifier. What's the Buddha talking about? Becoming what? Remember where this whole thing started. Becoming more ignorant. Becoming more and ever increasingly stuck in this feedback loop of self-referential views. And so we can only become more ignorant. Ignorance cannot lead to wisdom. Ignorance does not provide any wisdom to extract itself from that ignorant view. And an important component of ignorance is the need to continue to ignore anything that would challenge that ignorance. Again, I'm describing that conditioned thinking, that feedback loop. From becoming, as a requisite condition, comes birth. Now, the Buddha is not talking just about a physical birth, although that's really a small component of this, or even driving a future birth, although that's another component of this. What are we giving birth to in this moment? What are we becoming right now? This is the essence of what it means by becoming. The name of the title of the new book is called Becoming Buddha, Becoming Awakened. So in each and every moment, each and every moment holds the potential to become more ignorant, to continue down that path of that dependent origination is taking us down, or to incline our minds to develop the Eightfold Path and start becoming awakened, becoming Buddha. And it really is that simple. You could boil the entire Buddha Dhamma down to that one point. Am I contributing to my ignorance and ongoing confusion, deluded thinking, and suffering? Or in this moment, am I contributing towards my own awakening, my own liberation? And that's really the choice. And we shouldn't get fixated or habituated towards what's going on in this moment. But within the framework of the Eightfold Path, we can develop that gentle and refined mindfulness of being mindful of our life as life occurs, and then our own contributions to what are we becoming right now. From birth as a requisite condition comes aging, sickness, death, sorrow, regret, pain, distress, and despair. And that's how the Buddha describes suffering, dukkha. And not in dependent origination, but in other contexts, he then says not getting what is wanted is an aspect of that. We've given birth to that. Getting what is not wanted is a part of suffering. And then he would conclude that by saying, in short, the 5 clinging aggregates are dukkha, or suffering. And the 5 clinging aggregates, again, simply put, is the 5 clinging aggregates are the personal experience of ongoing suffering. So let me read this sutta for tonight. That's just a somewhat brief synopsis of dependent origination, maybe not all that brief. So the Mula Sutta, I've included it in this series of 3 talks and on the website and in the new book as part of a section that describes what becoming means. For a really good reason. Let me read it, and I think it'll be clear. In this Mula Sutta, the Buddha asks the assembled monks a rhetorical question. Monks, if those of other sects ask you, in what are all phenomena rooted? How do they come into play? What is their origination? How are they established? What is their foundation? Governing principle? What is their defining state? What is their heartwood? Where do they gain footing? And what is their cessation? In other words, how does it become? On being this asked, you should reply, all phenomena are rooted in desire. Now again, he's not talking about a creation myth where desire gives birth to the universe. He's talking about giving birth to suffering attached to what's occurring in the world. These self-referential views. We're joining with suffering. Is that clear? I'll just restate that. All phenomena are rooted in desire. All phenomena come into play through attention or mindfulness, what we hold in mind. We had an interesting discussion on retreat about quantum mechanics and how they're just starting to realize now how that thought impacts energy in a way that it can alter the way the particles and waves interact and create. Another way of saying this would be that what we hold in mind, what the observer is holding in mind, determines what is going to be experienced in their life. And they're having a hard time getting past that. How do we take the observer out of the equation? You can't. You can't do it. And I don't think they'll ever be able to do it because it doesn't fit in, at least, it doesn't fit in with what the Buddha taught. Whatever we hold in mind is going to determine our experience. Now, we can sit and think all we want about $1 million appearing. That's not going to happen. That's not what this process is about. What we're determining by what we hold in mind is our experience of what's going to occur. So if we're well versed in the Dhamma and we hold in mind anything and $1 million happens to appear when we come out of meditation, we'll be very pleased, but we won't react to it. And if we find that out of meditation we can't find our wallet, we'll just look at it, look for our wallet without reacting to it. I know I'm using kind of a silly example, but the purpose of the Dhamma is not to manifest great riches or great power. The purpose of the Dhamma is to develop a calm and peaceful mind. And what we hold in mind will determine that experience. All phenomena comes into play through attention. All phenomena has contact as their origination. Remember what we talked about dependent origination just a moment ago. All phenomena has feelings as their establishment. All phenomena has concentration for their foundation. Again, what we hold in mind. All phenomena has mindfulness as their governing principle. All phenomena has discernment as their defining state. What does that mean? It means that what we have the power to decide what we're going to hold in mind as long as we've developed concentration. If our minds are distracted, we don't have that power. Whatever occurs in our life, we're going to hold it in mind. But if we've developed a well-concentrated mind, then we have the discernment about what I'm going to hold in mind. Hold in mind the principles that are developed through the Eightfold Path. I will become a person with a calm and peaceful mind, no matter what's occurring in my life. It's really the point of the Dhamma. What are we becoming? All phenomena have release as their heart would. In other words, now the Buddha is going away from creating suffering to now, how do we develop an awakened mind? All phenomena have release as their heart would. Release is developed through the Eightfold Path, recognizing and abandoning craving and clinging thoughts and self-referential views. Often the Dhamma is referred in that way, the heartwood of the Dhamma. What is it? The heartwood of the Dhamma is abandoning craving and clinging. When the Buddha describes an awakened mind, he describes that mind as released or unbound from clinging. That's the heartwood of the Dhamma. All phenomena gains footing in impermanence. So initially, impermanence is looked at kind of as the problem. When you first encounter the three marks of existence, it's identified more as the problem when it really is just the common underlying state of all phenomena. Everything that occurs in the phenomenal world is impermanence. And if it wasn't for impermanence, we couldn't extract ourselves from suffering, could we? It would just be a permanent state that we're stuck in. We'd be stuck in that feedback loop that the Buddha defines in the Gara Sutta. There'd be no way out. This points to the third noble truth, that cessation of suffering is possible. Why that's there, some people say, well, isn't that a redundant statement, given what's the next statement, the Eightfold Path as the path? But it's important to remind ourselves continually that no matter what state we find ourselves in, because of impermanence, we can change that state by what we hold in mind. Each moment holds a potential on what we're going to become, depending on what's held in mind. And then the Buddha concludes that with saying, all phenomena has unbinding as their cessation. Everything that we find ourselves attached to, the things that we most hold dear, or maybe the things that we are most averse to, which is really the same thing, within us, we have the potential to let go of that attachment. How do we do it most directly? By recognizing, the Buddha teaches us often, by recognizing that whatever we're creating a self-referential view of, whatever's creating a disturbance in our mind, remind ourselves, this is not me, this is not mine, this is not who I am. Sometimes that becomes even easier to accept when we recognize that what we're attaching ourselves to is inherently impermanent. There's no substance to it. It's like foam on the ocean, as the Buddha would say. Why would we want to create an attachment or a disturbance over this? Why would we want to continually become more ignorant, more prone to confusion, delusion, and suffering through clinging and attachment to wrong views? Why wouldn't we want to become awakened, become a Buddha? There's more to the article, but I think I'm going to end it there. I think that's a good place to end tonight's talk. So, any questions directly about, maybe if you've listened to the other two talks or tonight's talk, and then we'll just go around the room. It's clear what becoming means in this context.
It's interesting. It is just like the take the dependent origination and then just turn it around and sort of in a way the opposite side of the coin or the other side of the coin can still. No, it's still like there is ignorance, but you can, if you finally realize letting go of that ignorance is where it's at, you can let go.
Yeah, even in this article, but in the Paticca Samuppada Sutta, the Sutta on Dependent Origination, the Buddha presents first from ignorance to suffering arising, those 12 links, and then he reverses it and describes in reverse order how do we undo this process. And it's so important to understand it. Thanks for bringing that up, because, again, even though we have we have rooted our human experience in ignorance. That ignorance is not permanent, nothing is. And through the Eightfold Path, we can recognize and abandon all ignorant or wrong views. And again, even using the word ignorant sounds pretty harsh at first, except remember, it's not describing that as human beings we're just ignorant fools. Because if we were just ignorant fools, we couldn't extract ourselves from that ignorance. But we're stuck in a view that's rooted in ignorance. Again, that feedback loop that the Buddha described. And that's what we're addressing. That's what the Buddha addressed with Four Noble Truths in the Eightfold Path, to bring cessation to those ignorant views. And we do that beginning right where we are, beginning in ignorance. I mean, to me, when I think about this is the brilliance of an awakened human being. He realized we couldn't magically move out of ignorance. He had to come up with a way that could address ignorance at its core and allow that ignorance to be as it is why we become something other than ignorant. And again, there's the Eightfold Path. It's another word for confirmation bias or conditioned thinking. It's all ignorance. Some other common phrases that refer to that is anatta, the not self characteristic, the five clinging aggregates. You can even say that karma, unfolding karma, is an aspect of ignorance. It's all part of that. It's all part of that initial wrong view. And look at the first factor of the Eightfold Path is right view. To put the significance on what we're trying to do is to go from a wrong, ignorant view to a wise and right view, a correct view, a skillful view, an appropriate view of what's occurring. Appropriate view doesn't change the fact of ignorance leading to suffering. It overcomes that fact. This is getting into a subtle misunderstanding of the Dhamma, modern Buddhism, that there's some kind of inherent Buddha nature within ignorance. And the two just don't even apply. The concept of an inner Buddha nature underlying ignorance, when you think about it, is kind of silly, isn't it? How could a Buddha nature devolve into ignorance in the first place? Why would we want to aspire to that nature if it was prone to falling into ignorance? There's nothing there. Again, the two don't relate. There's just ignorance is the cause of all human suffering. Recognize that and let go of ignorance. And we do that again within wherever we find ourselves. It's why I often say we need to be very gentle with ourselves, because if we start judging ourselves, we might not even say, well, I'm so ignorant, what a fool. But just, it's often driven in, especially in the Western world, that in order to change anything about ourselves, we first have to find out how foolish we are, how wrong we are, give ourselves 40 lashes, and then that'll motivate us to change. And nothing is further from the truth. That's just an ignorant reaction. We simply recognize with gentleness that my views are wrong views. And here's a gentle and direct path to develop that can lead me away from wrong view and develop profound right view. So, great question. Great comment. Any other questions on this? And then we'll go around the room. Stefan, good to see you. And I should say, I don't say it often enough. If you don't feel like talking, you don't have to talk here. But it's nice to have a Sangha discussion. Good to see you, my friend.
Good to see you too. I'm glad that you're talking about this topic. I didn't find that becoming was a little bit confusing, because like you said, you end up asking becoming what?
Yeah.
What is becoming what? And it seems like there are words missing on the beginning and the end.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Yeah, I mean, you have to be mindful of the context, or you can put anything in there. Good to see you. Mark, good to see you.
Good to see you. It's good to be here. Something came up for me over the weekend. It was kind of recognizing an identity that I had established around a couple of things, which basically relate to chores, if you will, doing the bills or mowing the lawn or something like that. But I actually recognized the fact that I was holding on very tightly to these things. So you mentioned no matter how difficult it makes your life, you hold on to it as this, identity that you've created. And I had what, after the fact, seemed like such a simple, obvious thing, as it always does, that just kind of came to me, which was I was really stressing myself out about finding time to do these things because I had to do them and there was no other way to have it be done. And then, of course, life challenged that ability, and it forced me to look at it, and it was pretty powerful. And then, as I mentioned afterwards, it was just like, wow, how come I couldn't see that before? But it really was a strong identity that I created around it. And then as soon as I was able to see that, I was able to say, wow, I really don't want to hold on to that. It's not doing me any service. So I kind of just let that piece of it go. It was huge relief. So.
And it changed your whole experience of what was occurring.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just kind of the eightfold path of work.
Yeah, you just described beautifully what the Buddha described in his awakening sutta, the Nagara Sutta. You were stuck in the feedback loop of self-referential views. You couldn't see anything else until you changed the view. Once you change your view, there was this great spaciousness there around a very particular subject.
Right. There's plenty of other views I got to work through, but it was good to. I was actually talking it out in a very anxious way, almost as like, well, I have to do this because I need this and that, and I've created this identity. Oh God.
That's where you need to be gentle with yourself.
Exactly.
And it's when you start looking at that, it's astonishing how far you'll go to protect that identity over things that are really almost always insignificant. They just don't matter one way or the other. It really doesn't matter. But you got this view. And there is stress. That's dukkha.
Yeah, it was a direct, one directly leads immediately to the other. Yeah. And then seeing that, it was just like a light bulb went on. It's like, wow, it's a lot of stress and energy I was just spending over something that just really doesn't seem so important now.
Yeah, good for you. The Dhamma at work. Glad you're here tonight. Kevin, good to see you. How are you?
Good. This week was kind of a difficult week in a way, but the storm kind of made me sort of put it in perspective in a way. I mean, the storm, almost like the thunder, it's impermanent. It's even anatta too, because I like thunder. I've always liked thunder. And I always think, oh, I love that thunder. And I start to attach to the thunder, but it's gone. And it's also maybe dukkha too, because it can be destructive. It has all of this that stuff. But at the beginning of this week, in my meditation, I was having a lot of difficulty because of the thoughts and the thoughts and the thoughts, and then having to bring that concentration back. And as the week went on, finally, yesterday evening, this morning, I was finally able to concentrate enough that I was able to let the thoughts go. But they can be as strong as that one huge thunderclap, or they can be subtle.
Yep.
They can just be out there somewhere, in the background, and then you have to, we try to breathe and focus on the breathing so that you can let it go.
Yeah, and you can let it go, but the Dhamma practice is just like that, isn't it? Sometimes it just seems to be effortless. In meditation, every session is wonderful, and then other times it's not. And that's just different aspect of conditioned thinking coming up. And if we didn't have a well-concentrated mind to understand that, you could get easily stuck in, well, this doesn't work. Get rid of this thought. I got so many thoughts. It's just another self-referential thought. No matter how loud the thunder, it's just thunder. It's just impermanent. Come back to the sensation of breathing. I'm interested to look at this to see if that one big thunder got a reaction, because I think it might be on the videotape.
I could actually hear the crackle right out this window right before it hit.
Really?
Yeah.
There's a really large flash. too.
Wow.
Yeah,
Like,
a flash, and it was sort of like a.
I love it. I love
Unnatural
storms.
thunder.
Yeah, no, I think I am. I can remember storms, like, as you were talking, I was remembering a storm. I was just driving out of Cape May in the early evening, and driving those flats going up to Wildwood, and there was an electrical storm. I can still remember it clearly. Or storms that happen in Hawaii or other places. I love them. If I can, when a storm comes up, if I'm not doing anything else that I can't get away from, I usually meditate. I just enjoy it.
It's interesting. I wonder, because of the rainy season and all that, and Buddha and the Sangha gathering together, I wonder how much thunder that was, or if we even has any sutras that have to deal with storms and thunder.
Got to look at that, because they spent the 3 months of the year during the monsoon, during the rainy season, usually back at the Pandika's monastery. Just knew. And just for practical reasons, I guess that was the beginning of retreats, but they did it because you couldn't be sloshing around the rest of India during that time. It was just too difficult. Let's go hang out with the folks. Good to see you. Joe, good to see you tonight.
I guess I have a question. When I think of the Dhamma, when I reflect or ponder over the things that I'm attempting to learn, I do it in a linear fashion. So like I'll back up and then I'll take a broad look at the information that I've collected and just let it sit. Dependent origination, I guess I'm not clear on, because I have a picture of that, of what I think it is, basically a chain of events that is the feedback loop of ignorance. But I may be wrong. So the question is, when you say that the Buddha awakened to dependent origination, that's what I don't get, and maybe I don't get it because I'm not clear on dependent origination.
Psychology too. That is a little bit vague, isn't it, that the Buddha awakened to dependent origination. What the Buddha awakened to was that it was ignorance of Four Noble Truths. Ignorance of the way things are that leads to all manner of suffering. The 12 causative links, the 12 links in the chain of dependencies, the causative effect of ignorance down into detail. Some people find the detail enlightening. Some people get lost in the detail. I mean, I've had quite a few conversations with people who get very, very frustrated with that. The understanding dependent origination is important, but only to the extent that you understand that it is ignorance of Four Noble Truths. That's the problem. What we do now. What do we do? The Four Noble Truths says dukkha occurs, the description of the result of ignorance. It tells us that it is individual craving that originates and individual clinging that perpetuates that original suffering, that initial suffering. The Noble Truth says it is possible to undo this process of creating the suffering. And then it clearly states that the Eightfold Path is the path for ending our craving and clinging and ending our contributions to suffering. And the Buddha awakened to the problem of ignorance of Four Noble Truths. Fourth truth to end that ignorance for all of us.
But so dependent origination is that feedback loop of perpetuating ignorance.
There's a component of that. I think it's the sixth and seventh factor. Being caught in name and form. Again, a simple explanation of name and form is self-referential views. Being stuck in that loop between self-referential views and ongoing consciousness that is rooted in ignorance. So we have, You get it?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the ongoing
sticking point
thinking that
was-
keeps us stuck in self-referential views, and it's the self-referential views that feed that ongoing consciousness, that ongoing thinking, remember, rooted in ignorance. And it's such a clear description when you realize that. It's not just self-referential views that keep us stuck, it's self-referential views that are continued through thinking, ongoing thinking rooted in ignorance. If you do something to supplant the initial ignorance, the Eightfold Path, then the feedback loop falls apart. When the feedback loop falls apart, the whole chain of dependencies falls apart. And again, that sounds like a very complicated way of simply recognizing the second factor of the Eightfold Path is the intention to recognize and abandon craving and clinging. That demolishes, breaks apart all of the chain of dependencies right there, right then and there. Once you
And it's what we're doing during meditation when we're putting space between thoughts.
Exactly. Yes, that's the whole purpose. That's concentration. Interrupting that constant flow of consciousness rooted in ignorance. And every time that we find ourselves caught up in our thinking, in that ongoing self-referential consciousness, even if it's just for a moment, we're interrupting dependent origination, just in that moment. The more that we can deepen our concentration, the more that we can incorporate off our cushions the other factors of the Eightfold Path, the more we can continue that interruption. And one feeds the other. In other words, it's not just meditation alone. It's just meditation alone. Without the other factors of the Eightfold Path, we won't be able to deepen our concentration enough. And if we don't have a deep enough concentration, we cannot hold in mind the other factors of the Eightfold Path. Again, that's why the Buddha didn't say just, if you just go meditate long and hard enough, you're good to go. In fact, one of these days, I hope to come across a sutta where the Buddha says you're meditating too much and too hard. I haven't come across it yet, but he implies it by the way that he teaches meditation. The only reason I say that is I spent a lot of time in they're called sesshins. Long, I would say forced, but you accept responsibility for engaging in that. Long periods, day after day, of 14, 16 hours of meditation over and over. I mean, my thinking was that if I just did this long and hard enough, and that's how it was presented, that eventually this explosion of Buddha nature would occur. And it never happened. And the best thing I got out of these 7 and 10 day sesshins was that they came to an end. Honestly, I know that many people engage in those practices and they find benefit from it. For me, it wasn't. And again, I don't understand the benefit of long periods of meditation, especially when we do that without the benefit of the entire Eightfold Path. It just reinforces conditioned thinking because there's no other way of seeing it. So again, the simplest way to look at dependent origination is that it is from ignorance of Four Noble Truths that I create confusion, polluted thinking, and suffering in my life. So what does that lead me to? I want to develop understanding of Four Noble Truths. What does it mean? And that is not all that complicated. It really isn't. The complications and the difficulty comes in developing the Dhamma because of our own conditioned thinking, our own confirmation bias, our own need to ignore anything that would challenge our ignorance. That's where the difficulty comes. That's why the mind keeps wanting to go back to thoughts while we're trying to maintain mindfulness of the breath. It's simply conditioned thinking. It's simply that familiar feedback loop of I need to always be thinking about myself. I need to always be stuck in my story. I can't just sit here and be mindful of my breath. But most of the examples of the Buddha are just that, sitting in that pose of being well concentrated, not stuck up in that story, the feedback loop. Great question, Joe. Thank you. Any other questions or comments about tonight's teaching? Okay. I had a couple of. I think I put it out in the newsletters, and you probably all know the pictures from the last retreat and the talks from last retreat are on the website, and the registration for October's retreat is up on the website too. So, if there's no other questions or comments, we'll finish with the Metta Sutta. So find your relaxed meditative posture, and gently close your eyes and gently close your mouths. And take a moment to become mindful of the sensation of breathing in your body. And let that mindfulness of your breath cease any distracting thoughts to the past or to the future, or that may have arisen from our talk tonight. Oh, I lost my page, sorry. And metta is both an aspiration for those of us developing the Eightfold Path and an ongoing expression of an awakened being. And these are the Buddha's words on metta from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, content and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing, in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, all, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you all for a wonderful class. Peace.